From 1878 to 1968, there were 71 lake captains that called Bayview, Wisconsin, on the shore of Lake Michigan, their home. While they lived here, they captained 195 different ships, from tugboats to schooners to steamships, in voyages that took them to every one of the Great Lakes. Join us now for another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we explore not only these captains, but also their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes.
Well, hi again, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we talk about the 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview, Wisconsin, from 1878 to 1968 in the age of sail and steam. This episode, like all the other ones, is brought to you by the historic Bayview Lake Captains Society. Now today, I'm filming not in Bayview, but in the 3rd Ward. Wait, no, I thought this was about Bayview Lake Captains. It is. And the building behind me was once, the 2nd floor, was once the headquarters of the Milwaukee chapter of the International Shipmasters Association. Bayview Lake Captains, 6 of them, were president of this local chapter. The very first president that the ISMA Milwaukee chapter had, in fact, was a Bayview Lake captain, and he lived on Burrell Street in Bayview while he was president. And this is actually their 2nd building. Their first building was in the American Express building on Broadway Street downtown. But what they found was that most of their members lived on the south side, and they wanted to get closer to them. They probably also needed a larger facility because they were formed initially in 1891, and they moved here in 1895. They started out with about 37 members, but when they moved here they had almost 70, so they probably needed a larger space for their meetings and their activities. They had professional meetings there, of course, but also social. In a library, billiards room, and it was all housed here. And like I say, it had a substantial Bayview connection. So I hope you'll enjoy today's video. Coming up here in a second, narrated by Simon Stanhope. And with that, I'll say hats off to our Bayview Lake captains. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Welcome to another installment of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we discuss the lives of the 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview, Wisconsin, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in the age of sail and steam. This discussion will include their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes. Today, we will not be discussing the life of a Bayview Lake captain, but rather the professional maritime organization they both led and were a part of. Specifically, this episode is about the substantial connection between Bayview Lake captains and the Milwaukee Branch of the International Shipmasters Association. In 1886, this Great Lakes-wide organization was formed for the purpose of facilitating the interests of ship captains. It was named the International Shipmasters Association, abbreviated as ISMA, and by 1897 it had expanded to 9 local chapters throughout the lakes called lodges. The Milwaukee chapter, officially called Lodge No. 6 of the ISMA, began on 3rd February 1891. Its first president was Bayview Lake Captain James Leisk. 3 more, and probably 5, making the total 6, Bayview Lake captains were to also become Milwaukee ISMA chapter presidents, in this probable chronological order: Joseph A. Brownell, date unknown; Colin C. Carlisle, date unknown; and Carl W. Bash, 1944. Unconfirmed but probable president in 1912, Captain John Leisk, brother of James, led the ISMA Milwaukee's Grand March at its annual convention that year, indicating he was likely its president. The same goes for Bayview's Captain George Thorson, who led the march in 1936–38, 41–42, and 44–47. Colin Carlisle went on to become the ISMA's Grand Lodge president, the parent organization of the 9 local chapters, in 1936. James Leisk's son Harry later became Milwaukee's Lodge No. 6's president, making them the only father and son to achieve such standing. Bayview's Frank Bud Richardson was Lodge No. 6's first vice president in 1926, as was John S. Wright, date unknown. So Bayview was prominently featured in the Milwaukee ISMA leadership over the years. See the links in the description box for the biographical episodes that have been created so far on this channel about these men. Others will be created in the near future. Many more of Bayview's lake captains are documented to have been regular members. Carl Bash had been a regular member for over 30 years before becoming president. Other Bayview lake captains documented to have been members are Hawley Boyce, Hugh Clark, John Doak, Thomas Dunn, Charles Ellis, Thomas Kearns, Thomas Leisk, Thomas Richardson, and William E. Wright. There were undoubtedly more. While Lodge No. 6 of the ISMA was the most prominent lake captains' organization that Bayview lake captains were involved with over the years, it wasn't the only one. For example, William F. Brager was president and director of the Wisconsin Federation of Commercial Fishermen and vice president of the Milwaukee Commercial Fishermen's Association. Leonard F. Caswell was president of the Milwaukee Branch of the National Tugmen's Association in 1901. William J. Laurie was president and commodore of the South Shore Yacht Club in 1943, and James Leisk was also president of the Milwaukee branch of the Shipmasters Excelsior Marine Benevolent Association, probably in 1892, that donated all of its local branches combined nationally over $11,000, which equates to over $300,000 in 2020, to the families of lake captains that lost their lives on the lakes in 1892. The fact that such an organization existed for this purpose is a clear indicator of just how dangerous it was sailing the Great Lakes in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But of all these, Milwaukee's ISMA Lodge No. 6 was probably the largest. Upon being formed in 1891, again, James Leisk of Bayview was its first president. The lodge set up its headquarters on the 3rd floor of the American Express building on Broadway Street in downtown Milwaukee. However, just 4 years later, in April 1895, the lodge decided to move to the 2nd floor at 138 Reed Street, today 196 South 2nd Street, in the 3rd Ward, to get closer to its members. 75% of its members at that time lived on the south side of Milwaukee, where the port was and is. When the lodge had started on 3rd February 1891, it had 37 members, and by April 1895, at the time of the second move, it had almost doubled this to 68 members. Captains and sailors of the 19th century didn't make much money. When ashore, having a place to gather where they could socialize amongst themselves, read, play cards, and other similar activities was important to them. There was no internet nor other forms of entertainment like we have today, There wasn't even radio. While no photos could be found of the interior of Milwaukee's ISMA Lodge No. 6, history does provide a very detailed written description of what its inside once looked like. Therefore, in order to try to provide a visual to match this known written description, we will be inserting accompanying photos of a different but similar gathering place designed for sailors, a beautifully restored 19th century sailors' reading room in the seaside village of Southwold in England. We'll begin first with some exterior photos of this building before proceeding with the inside. Here is the beautiful sailors' reading room building in Southwold, which still exists today, restored and saved in its original condition, including the plaque on its south-facing exterior wall. It is built in a spectacular setting on a cliff overlooking the North Sea, and is very representative of what gathering places for sailors of this period in history looked like. Steps lead down to the beach. Just below it can be seen Southwold's promenade, with its summer bathing huts for beachgoers, still in use today. Here you can see its approximate location near Southwold's lighthouse. Now we will move to the inside, with interior photos of the Southwold Sailors' Reading Room, matched as best as possible with the written description of the Milwaukee ISMA Lodge No. 6's interior. These descriptions were published in 1895, 1897, 1899, and 1926 in the Milwaukee Journal and Milwaukee Sentinel, with excerpts noted in quotation marks. Further details and sources are to be found in the book Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, under the appendix that discusses Lodge No. 6. Hanging on the walls of the rooms inside the lodge were, quote, many pictures of some of the famous ships of the lakes, old schooners and tugs, of which the present members were at one time the commanders, unquote. These included, quote, such boats as the Old Northwest, Lottie Wolf, Monitor, C.W. Jones, Winslow, Porter, Parana, and the Davina, unquote. These similar interior photos of Southwold's Sailors' Reading Room give an idea of what this looked like. There was also a very large composite photo of many of the original founding members. Note Bayview's James Leisk, the lodge's first president, was likely in this Milwaukee ISMA Lodge 6 photograph. Here you see a Southwold Sailors' Reading Room composite photo of some of its members for comparison. This maritime and nautical cornucopia continued in another room that held, quote, a very handsome 18-inch globe, a large chart table, a complete set of charts of oceans, lakes, and rivers, and a sextant to 155 degrees, unquote. There were also, quote, models of the most famous lake and ocean ships, yachts, and steamers, unquote. The Milwaukee ISMA Lodge also contained books in a dedicated library, of which each member received a door key, totaling 700 volumes, that included 8 years' worth of bound volumes of the Scientific American, presented to the lodge by William Plankinton. Elsewhere in the library are recorded government reports, naval architecture documents and writings, and other non-maritime literature for casual reading. At that time, 1895, this library collection was reported as being worth $1,000, equating to $30,000 in 2020. There doesn't appear to be a dedicated library in Southwold's Sailors' Reading Room, but undoubtedly the sailors would have used the main room shown here for reading books available on nearby bookshelves. Perhaps most impressive was the lodge's president's gavel used at meetings. It was, quote, a marble gavel block, and was the most valued of the club's treasures. The handle was made of a piece of the famous old ship USS Kearsarge of Civil War fame, and the head of it was made of a piece of equally old wood from the USS Hartford, in which USN Admiral Farragut stood when he cried during the Civil War in battle aboard the Hartford, "Damn the torpedoes, go ahead." The masters, captains in the lodge, think more of it than all the rest of their treasures." Unquote. The lodge was professional, social, and fraternal. For the professional category, lectures took place and sailing adventure stories were related. Supporting the social and fraternal categories at the lodge's facilities were billiards, checkers, cinch card game parties, and chess tables for many. The use of liquor and gambling was not allowed. In the off-season, December through mid-April, when the lakes were frozen over, meetings were held each Tuesday. Lodge No. 6 continued to grow over the years in the scope of its social activities too. Most notable was an annual dance and ball in January, after the lakes had frozen and all the captains were home. It was a huge, elaborate affair, with a formal parade and march inside the venue to kick things off. For many years it was held at the Schroeder Hotel in downtown Milwaukee. Called the Grand March, it was typically led by the president of the lodge. Bayview Lake captains documented to have led it are John Leisk, 1912, and George Thorson, 1936–38, 41–42, and 44–47. But as time progressed and ship construction dramatically improved, such as larger, safer ships with new technology like radar, GPS, ship-to-shore communications and more, fewer ships were needed. One large steel-hulled steamship could now carry the same cargo more reliably and safely than many different schooners combined, or even the early wooden-hulled steamships of just a few decades earlier. Fewer ships meant fewer captains. At the same time, the automobile, truck and train developed, moving a lot of the goods over roads and rails instead of on the water. These additional methods cut into cargo shipments that were once the sole domain of Great Lakes shipping. They also contributed to fewer ships, and even fewer lake captains. The Milwaukee Lodge No. 6 of the ISMA still exists today, though it doesn't appear it still meets in its original building. Per its website, it hosts monthly meetings, quote, "at a variety of establishments around the Milwaukee Harbor," unquote. In the heyday of sail and steam, the ISMA Milwaukee Lodge was very prominent in the lives of lake captains. Bayview's lake captains were not only substantially involved in it, they helped to establish it. Thanks for watching. This photograph isn't about Bayview or its lake captains, but it's from the same era of Great Lakes maritime history. We thought we'd close with it for enjoyment, as it captures the spirit of the era. If you'd like to read more details about Bayview lake captains involved in Milwaukee's ISMA Lodge No. 6, as well as the sources for the information contained in today's video, you can find these and more in the book Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, for sale now, by individual volumes in both e-book and paperback, on both Amazon.com and HenschelHouseBooks.com. All proceeds from book sales go to support various maritime history projects related to Bayview's lake captains. One of these is a plaque and marker with the captains' names and addresses on it, as part of the creation of the Bayview Lake Captains Historic District, which will be the first of its kind in America. If you would like to contribute to support these projects, to include this and other markers honouring Bayview's lake captains, with 100% of all donations and contributions in all forms going to support them, please consider contributing to us through the listings found on our website under the Contribute button, as well as in the end credits at the conclusion of this video. Note, we are not a 501c3, so contributions are not tax-deductible. If, for some reason, we are unable to secure these markers, then all funds donated to this site will be given as a cash donation to the museum ship SS City of Milwaukee in Manistee, Michigan. This is the only surviving intact ship that was once captained by a Bayview Lake captain, and in its case was captained by at least 2, and likely 3, totaling over 20 years between them. Finally, we also have free self-guided walking tours of Bayview's 71 lake captains' homes, using only your phone. It's simple and easy. Just go to our website shown here, find the item on the menu bar at the upper left named Free Self-Guided Walking Tours, and then scroll down to find the map with the instructions. Zoom in by street. When you find a captain's house you're interested in, click on it and details appear on the right, along with a link to the YouTube episode from this channel that provides the biography of the captain that lived there. It's free, fun, and available any time you're out walking. Just bring along your phone. I'm Simon Stanhope, narrator for these episodes. Join us again soon for the next chapter of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains.